Got a reading this morning from myself. This is a piece that I wrote 7 or 8 years ago for a young adult spirituality manual called Becoming. And it was highlighted in the worship resources we got from Soul Matters on this month's theme of cultivating relationship. And it sparked a new reflection for me, so I thought I'd share it with you. It's called The Grout. The Unitarian Universalist congregation where I served my internship made a mosaic tree of life the summer before I arrived. Congregants of all ages came together to craft the tree's leaves using bits and pieces of broken ceramics, jewelry, glass, and stone. There are many precious personal items in the tree, including fragments of the Berlin Wall, a father's watch face, pieces of great-grandmother's china, and a key to the front door of a beloved home. Like the members of the community that brought them together, each part is imbued with memories and meaning. Each fragment holds a piece of truth. Unitarian Universalists are mosaic makers. We are a people who bring together the broken pieces of our histories and the shining pieces of our seeking, and piece by piece create a mosaic religion. Our tree of life is found in the stories of our living tradition, the bead from a transformational moment of worship at a youth conference, the bit of paper stamped with the blazing emblem of the Unitarian Service Committee that saved lives during World War II, the button or patch on a backpack that proudly proclaims the first justice issue that set our souls on fire. But our mosaic making tells another story too, one that's more difficult to see, one that is essential to the purpose of religious community, one that lies not in the beautiful and broken bits and pieces, but in the grout. Grout, that chalky, gritty stuff squeezed between the cracks of tiles. In a mosaic, the grout holds the image together, unifying disparate pieces into a whole. The grout of community takes years to lay and settle. Grout happens in board meetings and endless emails and slow-moving institutions. It's in weekly potlucks shared by neighbors, a ride to church, and coffee in the social hall after worship. While the folks who show up for church only on Christmas and Easter will hopefully enjoy the beauty of the mosaic they find, they may never know the power of the grout that holds us through all the seasons of life. We help to make the grout when we learn each other's names and when we reach out across generational divides. We help to make the grout when we show up on Sunday morning without having checked first to see if we're interested in the sermon topic. When a newborn arrives to be blessed by the community, it is the grout that enables us to welcome them. And it is in the grout, it's in the grout that we rest when we gather to grieve and memorialize a beloved one who has died. Hold us, O grout. Gather us in through time and space and make all our broken pieces whole in community. In our multiplicity, make us one. From each of our jagged edges, give us the shape of a communal beauty. So ends the reading. And here's what I realized rereading that piece this time around. I think another word for grout could be trust. And I think we've done a stress test in our society, not only on the systems of democracy, as the headlines daily remind us, as that gut unease daily reminds us, but a stress test on our level of cultural trust in one another. Are we in it together in any basic way as a society any longer? And while the institutions of democracy seem to be holding fragilely together, we've, I think, seen an utter fracturing of the baseline trust that we have of one another, at least as large groups. So I've been thinking about trust, and then I've been thinking about trust in the practice of ministry. I think about trust in the practice of ministry a lot. When I first began working with you here in Marin, I attended a training for transitions ministries. Those of us embarking on interim and developmental ministries. And one of the exercises we did was to think about the needs of a congregation through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. What, our facilitator asked, what is the base of that pyramid? The most essential thing that a congregation needs its minister to do. And as our small group debated the various pyramids that we had drawn, everybody had their individual time to draw their pyramid, and then we came together to sort them out. And some advocated for worship, and some talked about pastoral care, other specific functions of a minister. I kind of had one of those smug gold star moments because I had the right answer that the teacher even said was right at the end. Trust. Trust is the basis of all good ministry and of community and relationship that can hold us when times are hard. A decade or so ago, I received the feedback at one stage or another, I can't remember exactly when it was, in the ministerial formation process, that perhaps I was a little overly trusting, and that this could cause me challenges in my life and ministry. They weren't wrong. I've seen some tough times as a result, in part, of trusting into relationships where I should have been more cautious if I wanted less anguish and heartbreak. But I realize I haven't actually learned what should be the obvious lesson from those moments, how to offer my trust less freely. No, I've learned quite an opposite lesson. Because every time that I've been thrown about, my heart or spirit left bruised and beaten by the hard rocks of human relationship, I've actually learned to trust more deeply that I'm still held throughout this life. People show up. Friends, family, neighbors, bus drivers, hairdressers, church members, support groups, social workers, psychiatrists, a guy at the farmer's market you like to chat with. People show up. People keep showing up. And then there are those times when people are somehow both not enough and too much. Those times when you can feel lonely even surrounded in a crowd, perhaps especially surrounded by people. Lonely standing around at coffee hour and unsure if it's worth talking to anyone. Lonely at home on Zoom, feeling the distance from your gathered community. When a meal with friends can feel overwhelming. When you can't find the right words to share what's going on, even on the phone with a friend, because maybe there aren't any right words. Maybe you won't ever be understood. What I've noticed about those times when people are somehow both not enough and too much is that the world is always still there. Always still with me, always reminding me that I belong. The oaks and the laurels, they hold me daily as I walk a path beneath their familiar canopies. See with every turning day how each season wants to make a child of you again. Wants you to become a seeker after rainfall and birdsong. A couple lines from a poem of David White's that showed up for me, held me this past year. When we couldn't show up with each other, we turned, many of us, in whatever ways we could, to our greater world, this unbelievable cosmos we find ourselves a part of, and to our inner lives. Many of us taking time to notice how the two are connected. Wants to make a child of you again. Wants you to become a seeker after bird song and rainfall. Wants you to embrace the world with that innocent child's trust, to throw yourself into its arms with abandon. In Mary Oliver's words, when it's over, I want to say, all my life, I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. Or in Ada Limon's, Jay said, "You don't believe in God?" And I said, "No. I believe in this connection we all have to nature, to each other, to the universe." And she said, "Yeah, God." Trust. Trust in nature, each other, the universe, trust in God. How do we build it? How do we cultivate this relationship with whatever you call God? The deep solidity of the tree. The trust in a tree that you can lean on, one you can climb on that will support you even high above the ground. That kind of solidity, it requires time and patience. One of the adages we've spoken about in leadership here the past couple of years is moving at the speed of trust. And the writer and activist Adrienne Marie Brown wrote about moving at the speed of trust in her book, Emergent Strategy. She says, how fast you can move is determined by how much trust you have. And people won't trust you unless you're vulnerable with them. Trust and vulnerability. And it's tricky, of course, because vulnerability builds trust, but you also need trust to express vulnerably. And I realized, thinking about that, it's a long spoon problem. Hell is the place where you are in agony, you are agonized over what you cannot give yourself because you can't trust anyone or anything to feed you. Heaven is the place where you so easily trust that others will nourish you. You easily and effortlessly serve those around you. The food and the long spoons, they're all the same. It's the trust that makes the difference. And I feel like I need to say clearly, because I know those words are loaded with religious trauma, sometimes some in decades of religious trauma. It's not about good, trusting people who get to live in heaven and bad, mistrusting folks who are stuck in hell. We imagine this as a continuum of states of consciousness, states of being, states of closed or open-heartedness. Let's call it the long spoon spectrum. And all of us, I'm pretty sure, experience moments, circumstances, stages of life where we dwell closer to heaven, closer to hell. And on the one hand, trust, it's a choice, it's a stance of faith. I remember reading Kierkegaard, the Danish theologian Søren Kierkegaard, and his analysis of the invitation to Christian faith. And he won me over as a pretty hard-minded rationalist undergraduate student. He won me over to his notion that ultimately Christianity asks a question to which there is no rational answer. It says, whatever way we decide about whether to place our faith in the story of Jesus and finding salvation there, whichever way we decide, it's a leap of faith. Don't hide behind your Hegelian rationality. I remember feeling scolded by Kierkegaard. Have the courage to own your own leap of faith, to claim whatever you are putting your trust in as a sacred moment of choice. And on the other hand, trust has nothing to do with choice, but rather is an embodied knowing developed over time in response to the world demonstrating its trustworthiness of people, institutions, demonstrating or not their trustworthiness. Trust is made of the organic, permeable boundaries that we develop, like cell walls, like the grout, that allow us to be both connected with ourselves and with the other, with the world. I remember a colleague once describing in our sometimes fraught conversations about boundaries in our roles as ministers and in our congregations generally, describing the ways that rigid boundaries that are built as walls out of brick can end up hurting people when they get knocked down or something comes loose. And that a better image for boundaries might be like the bark of a tree, mediating the forming edge between inner and outer life, able to break and to regrow. So I think trust involves both of these seemingly contradictory processes, a chosen stance toward life, a leap of faith, and also an organic unfolding of relationship mediated by our wise and responsive bark. And these are, in fact, a feedback loop. They can be a negative feedback loop, to be unsafe, to feel unsafe, expect to be unsafe, feel more unsafe, expect more to be unsafe. Or a positive feedback loop. Notice the good, experience the good, notice more good. And so one of the small practical ways we build our sense of trust in the world, I think, a small way to perhaps address some of the erosion of trust in the culture that can feel so overwhelming, has to do with weak ties. Do you know about weak ties? Weak ties are, they've done an enormous amount of research at this point on what social psychologists in the 1970s distinguished as strong ties and weak ties. Strong ties are those deep, intimate relationships we have, family members, close friends. And weak ties are the associations we have with a wider community. People who we see regularly and say hi to, exchange pleasantries, perhaps a little more. And what researchers keep finding, to the surprise of many, is that for a number of factors like happiness and longevity, the number and quality of weak ties in our lives is just as important, or perhaps even more important, than our strong ties. I think what that means to have grown up in a culture and at a time when I'd never known the name of the clerk who checks me out at the grocery store. About how countercultural it feels to strike up a conversation with my mail carrier. And then the pandemic. I found myself more hesitant these last 6 months in my new home to build relationships with new neighbors. I still do my best to walk on the other side of the street when I see somebody else coming, to give that personal space. Less out of concern for myself, more out of a sense that's what social grace demands these days. I think about what message that's sending to our bodies when we do that, what messages our bodies are holding, that no one is safe, stay away from strangers. And because we're living in a society that's been running a trust deficit already, this is only digging the hole deeper. I think the importance of weak ties is why so many folks let me know in our listening circles last spring how great it was to have virtual coffee hour where people met and had brief conversations with others they may never have gravitated towards in-person coffee hour. A little bit of resonance with a relative stranger can go a long way towards reassuring us that the world isn't just full of the scary people we disagree with about everything and who believe in everything against what we stand for and who populate so many of the stories in our news. It really is why we come to church. It's what happens in our small group ministry, our Soul Matters groups at their best. These Soul Matters groups, they're built on the Quaker teacher Parker Palmer's model of circles of trust. And so I want to share what he names as the touchstones of these circles, touchstones for building trust. And I think they apply whether you're in a small group or anywhere else in our lives. Practices for building trust. Give and receive welcome. Be present as fully as possible. What is offered is by invitation, not demand. Speak your truth in ways that respect other people's truths. No fixing, no saving, no advising, no setting each other straight. Learn to respond to others with honest, open questions. When the going gets rough, turn to wonder. Attend to your own inner teacher. Trust and learn from the silence. There's a lot in these touchstones, of course. Each one could be a sermon into itself. All an invitation into trust as a spiritual practice. Trust as a way of making our own lives more whole, more holy. Jay said, "You don't believe in God?" And I said, "No, I believe in this connection we have. This connection we all have to nature, to each other, to the universe." And she said, "Yeah, God, and how we stood there, low beasts among the white oaks, Spanish moss and spider webs, obsidian shards stuck in our pockets, woodpecker flurry." And I refused to call it so. So instead we looked up. At the unruly sky, its clouds in simple animal shapes. In simple animal shapes we could name, though we knew they were really just clouds, disorderly, marvelous, and ours. As these clouds pass over us with their buckets and buckets of rain, as the wind sweeps us out of the habitual blindness, complacency of our everyday lives, may we find ourselves, even amidst the storm, held by an unruly sky, by a nameless, infinite love. May it be so. And amen.